Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Come on and tune in to us on X at Santita J, the Santita Jackson Show. Two of those accounts are open, but I want you to go to at Santita J. So let me just go there. I really like that over there. But go to the Santita Jackson Show, the Santita Jackson Show on YouTube. Become my friend, like and subscribe there, and pass the show along. And if you would, please go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page. Santita Jackson and Friends page. Let's get right to it, everybody. Donald Trump, President-elect Trump, has gotten off to a rollicking start. A lot of people are looking at his cabinet picks, and they are controversial, to put it rather mildly. We've been taking them apart, and we've been looking at what we think his policies might be. We don't know everything because it's just, my pastor's wife, may she rest in peace, said, you know where you've been, but you don't know where you're going. No one knows all. But we do know this. Getting out of Afghanistan, which then President Trump initiated, did not work out smoothly at all. And we do know from press reports that when he tried to come out, when he was president, he was foiled. Indeed, generals in the administration, and there's a revolving door between the generals who are in any administration or high up in the military. They leave there and they go to the military industrial complex, make a lot of money, and come back. It's a revolving door. Is it not, Mike Ferner, Veterans for Peace Special Projects Director, and Attorney Mark Fancher, brilliant social critic and civil libertarian. So what is going on with these courts martial? Indeed, it has got official Washington. Well, everybody is quite upset. Let me read this to you from this NBC News report. For example, they pretty much are saying the same thing. The headline is Trump Transition Team compiling list of current and former U.S. military officers for possible courts martial. The story begins as this is by Courtney Cube, Carol Lee, and Vaughn Hilliard and Moshe Gaines. The Trump Transition Team is compiling a list of senior, current, and former U.S. military officers who were directly involved in the withdrawal from Afghanistan and exploring whether they could be court-martialed for their involvement, according to a U.S. official and a person familiar with the plan. Officials working on the transition team are considering creating a commission to investigate the 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan. I want you all to reach out and let me know what you think. Indeed, some of the headlines are like this. Trump's partisan generals would end American military might. Afghanistan withdrawal from CNN haunts Biden and Harris as another general raises alarm about Trump. And it just kept on going, how Trump swallowed a bitter Afghanistan pill. Indeed, he wanted to withdraw, but his generals convinced him not to. They said it would not be prudent. So what do you think, everybody? What would the courts martial of these generals mean? What would that look like? Mike Ferner, special projects. This is a special project of Veterans for Peace. It's got to be. What is going on here? Is this a shocking development? I mean, you're a veteran. You understand the culture of the military. I don't.
Well, hello, Santita and Marta,
Hey.
and thanks for inviting us back on. There are people that I know in Veterans for Peace who have followed the war in Afghanistan more closely than I have, who think there may very well be serious things that need investigation about the way the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. Whether court martials are on the horizon or not, it's another question. But I can tell you that the members of Veterans for Peace think that if there are any court martials on the horizon for anything that happened regarding the Afghanistan war, there is a long list that we can provide anybody in the Pentagon or the Department of Justice in case they have not done their homework. about war crimes that U.S. forces and our allies committed in Afghanistan over and over and over again. They are well documented, and if anybody's going to be brought up on court-martial charges, they very well better include some of the things that we did to the people of Afghanistan. And I've got a short list if you want to hear a couple of specifics, so this isn't just me going on saying.
No, I do. But first, I'd like for you to explain what a court martial is.
Well, a court martial is the way the military handles prosecuting people within the military. And you can get a court martial. I had a couple of them myself when I was in for low level stuff. And it goes all the way from there to, for example, there was a peace demonstration at the military base, at the Navy base I was at in 1972. And I was working at the Navy hospital there, and I took a sheet from the hospital, painted a big peace sign on it, and hung it on the fence where the protest was going to go by. And I got busted for that and was written up for a court martial. That's pretty low level stuff, all the way up to general courts martials and summary court martials where they're felonies. And these include things like, the worst felonies you can think of: murder, rape, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that either happen among military personnel, or things that our military personnel do when they're in other countries, whether they're combat zones or not, particularly when they're in combat zones. And there's a long list of things that the higher ups in the military ought to be accountable for. And My Lai, what happened in Vietnam, is a classic example. Hundreds of Vietnamese were murdered in cold blood, and the highest officer who was disciplined for that with a court martial was Lieutenant Calley, and he was a lieutenant. It went all the way up through Colin Powell up to William Westmoreland. So, the military has a long history of, if they ever do prosecute war crimes, making sure it's the folks at the bottom of the list that get hauled into the court.
So tell me, because I see you said how U.S. funded abuses led to the failure in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
How does that connect to these court martials? Because everyone is saying that they blame the Biden administration for a what some are terming a failed withdrawal.
Yeah.
And just as I've done more research, this was something I said, okay, but Trump is the one. President Trump initiated the withdrawal, and he wanted it to be rapid. He to get out immediately. Mm-hmm. It was his military staff that said, no, we can't do that. Now, hold on. Mm-hmm. You can't do this. You can't just rapidly pull everybody out. It has to be a slow withdrawal. So by the time the Biden administration got there and they wanted to extend it, Afghanistan officials said, you have until August 31st. You better be out of here. Mm-hmm. Not one day beyond. So tell me, what happened? Take us through that, because I'd like to know what happened. And if the president says, I want to get out, I know they can't just behave unilaterally, but in some matters they can. But it seems that he was stopped. And, before anyone says anything, I am no Trump apologist, everybody. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to get the story right. That's all. Mike Ferner, that's all. I'm trying to get the story right, because it's a mess.
Well, it sure is. And anytime you commit troops to another country and stay there for decades and commit all sorts of atrocities, there's no way you're going to get out of that situation without it being a terrible, tragic mess.
Atrocities?
Oh, yeah. Plenty. I've got a list of them. I can put some in the chat. You can get them to anybody that calls in who's interested, and I can read you a couple of them. But to answer your question, people who look at the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan and talk about what a debacle it was, they're the same people who start history on October 7th of last year and say, look what Hamas did. Well, you can start history on any day you want.
Hmm.
And based on when you start history, you can make your story work as well as possible. So if you want to look at what a debacle it was pulling U.S. troops out of Afghanistan, yeah, you can start history on the day that Biden gave the order, and it was a mess. It was a tragic mess, and a lot of people got killed that didn't have to. But the thing is, if you look back at the history of what happened in Afghanistan for the 20 years we were in there, and that's what this uh, article that you just referred to, how U.S. funded abuses led to failure in Afghanistan, and that is, this is all public record. Anybody that wants to spend a little time digging around, doing some searches, can find this stuff. It's not state secrets. And it's an in-depth article about how the U.S. behavior in Afghanistan just ensured, from the alliances that we had with the warlords early on, and the things that they did to people, just one here. This,
I mean, help us to see, because I think,
yeah.
Mark,
All
I
right,
think
in
it's important for
December,
us to
okay.
see.
All right, 2 months after we invaded Afghanistan, December of 2001, the Dasht-e-Laili massacre took place, where between 250 and 3,000 Taliban fighters who had surrendered were shot or suffocated to death in metal shipping containers during transportation by our allies at that time, the Northern Alliance forces. Reports place U.S. ground troops at the scene, and documentaries have investigated the allegations and claimed that mass graves of thousands of victims were found by UN investigators, and U.S. blocked investigations into the incident. That's one. That's one thing. Now, when you start, when that's your policy, that you figure out which warlord out of who knows how many is the one that you should ally with in order to get back at Afghanistan, and that's your policy, and you go down the road with that policy, then that's what you do, and people don't forget about it, and so that creates opposition to the occupation, and then we switch. We have a different warlord that's our ally, and then we wind up having a guy who was a CIA asset, installing him as president of the country, Karzai. I mean, it just goes on and on. And so now, so follow that history, and if your listeners are interested, look that history up. Some of the things that happened during that occupation, and then get to the point where Biden pulls the troops out and say, "Oh, what a mess." Well, I dare anybody to explain how you're going to do that without it being a mess. And so I hope if the Trump administration goes after anybody in the military, generals or whoever in the military, for how that war ended, they sure as hell better include some of the atrocities that we were involved in. And I have a much longer list I could put in the chat, and they better start investigating some of those. And I saw atrocities when I was in Iraq, and we've got incidents documented all over the place on Iraq and Afghanistan, and the U.S. just sweeps them under the rug.
Attorney Mark Fancher, your thoughts?
Well, I think if he's going to go after generals, personally, I think he should go after the generals who stopped him from pulling out as quickly and as early as he did, because we never should have been there. I'm gonna take us back a little further than Mike takes us. This really has its genesis in the 9/11 attacks, and it's bad enough that the U.S. military engages in these horrific acts, commits acts of atrocities and things like that when they are in war. It's worse when the war should never have come about in the first place.
Yep.
And after 9/11, when the U.S. was attacked in the way it was, what nobody ever talks about is the fact that the people who were involved in the attack were from Saudi Arabia. And they were motivated by the fact that the U.S. was in a very close relationship with the Saudi government. And those who were extreme, zealous, members of the far, extreme Muslim extremists. I don't like that term, but those who would engage in these types of acts in the name of Islam, they had problems with the Saudi government because they believed that the Saudi government was not acting in a way that was consistent with the most basic tenets of Islam. And so they were at war against their own government and anybody that was enabling their government. And their primary supporter was the US. And so they targeted the US for this attack on 9/11. And after they did this is a Saudi thing. It has nothing to do with any other country. This is a Saudi thing and a US thing. After they commit this terrible crime in New York, the first thing that George W. Bush says is, we've got to strike back, so let's attack Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And there's absolutely no connection. I mean, he's saying, that Saddam Hussein is the one that's responsible for this, so we've got to go and take him out. Now, if you want to know why he immediately goes to Iraq, you just have to look at what he did after they launched the first missiles at Iraq. People in Iraq wisely began to go out and burn the oil fields in Iraq. And I don't think I've ever seen a US president more frightened and shaken than when George W. Bush got on television and said, I want to speak to the people of Iraq. You're burning the oil fields. Don't do that. Those are your oil fields.
I'm not laughing. It's gallows humor every time. What did you say? You never saw a president look more shaken. Wait a minute, you're messing with the money. Don't burn.
Yeah.
Don't burn those greenbacks. Oh my goodness. Kill the people, but don't.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, he was visibly traumatized by the idea that these oil fields were going up in flames. And so then we have to go after, when they finally realize that, the world starts to realize that Iraq has nothing to do with 9/11, then, well, we got to find somebody else that we've got to blame it on. Let's blame it on Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is a good place to go because it's strategically located. It's very close to the Chinese border and the Russian border. And we want to invade and take over both of those countries. So let's go and take over Afghanistan. So let's go and start a war against them and take it over. The purported reason for going in there is that Afghanistan was giving refuge to Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. But the real reason was the same reason that they're so concerned about Ukraine. They want to get close enough to Russia that they can invade it and take it over. So, the idea that the U.S. would stay in Afghanistan for 2 decades because of 9/11, is really outrageous. And I think that, I just am waiting to see what Trump is doing and why he's doing what he's doing in connection with this. I mean, there's got to be a reason that's not yet been revealed. But that's how I process all of this. And I think I agree with Mike. There need to be a lot of people who are prosecuted for all of the crimes that have been taking place. But I don't think it should stop with the generals. It should extend as high as those who have made these decisions to go into these countries in the first place.
Well, thank you for taking us back a little further, Mark. Like I mentioned, you can start history whenever you want to, and you took it back further than I did. And that is very important, bringing in the Saudi angle around 9/11. That's incredibly important. And it's not unknown to the American people. I don't think enough people in this country ever really dig to find out what's going on in order to put some heat on the government and change policy. But it's not unknown. People understand that, and they have a memory of that being the case. And it's part of the reason, going a little afield here, it's part of the reason people are so distrusting of government because they see the government doing this stuff over and over and over again. And who benefits? The madmen arsonists, Santita, who I've mentioned here before. Even losing wars make money if you're invested in the right stuff, and
Do you think?
that's what drives our foreign policy.
Do you think that's why they said, "Wait a minute, a rapid withdrawal"? Well, a rapid withdrawal would be dangerous to the military-industrial complex because, Mark,
Well, if you're not, if you're not,
was that it?
if
Because
you're
he
not
said,
shooting
"Let's get
people,
out."
you're not using up the ordinance. Nobody has to
Sure.
order anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and you got to give us time to assess whatever damage we've caused, whatever devastation that we've caused, and give us a little time to negotiate some contracts with
Yeah.
people to come in here and rebuild things.
Yeah.
Because disaster capitalism is important to the American people. I mean, it ensures our security. For defense contractors and builders and others to make billions and trillions of dollars off of mass destruction. That's good for America.
Carlisle Incorporated, perfect example. Run by Dick Cheney's pals in the Iraq invasion. Who's going to benefit? The military-industrial complex, and Carlisle gets multi hundreds of billions of dollars of contracts to quote rebuild, and documented case after case of how the stuff they got paid to rebuild water systems that we bombed and electric systems generally never got rebuilt. So it's a huge, well, Smedley Butler, going back to the 1930s, he said it, and it applies today. War is a racket.
What did that book? I bought it. It's very thin, but boy, is it dense. It's full of information.
Yeah.
Who was he, and what was the book about?
He was a general, like major general, lieutenant general, I don't know, in the Marine Corps. Started out as a lieutenant and worked his way up. He's the only person in U.S. history to receive 2 Congressional Medals of Honor. The Marine Corps, to this day, he is an icon in the Marine Corps, and people who go through Marine Corps schools hear about him. They don't hear the stuff that's in that booklet, Santita. They hear about his exploits and how he got Congressional Medals of Honor. But unfortunately, as happens so often, people who are in the military or military companies and so forth start to understand what's really going on, and they wait till they retire to say something. And when Smedley Butler retired, boy, he opened up. And he said, I was a thug for Wall Street. I was a muscle man for capitalism. And I made Nicaragua safe for the banking interests. I made China safe for the oil interests, and on and on and on. And that's, it's never changed. You go down, and we are the empire. And the empire does what it has always done back to the Roman times and British and everything, British Empire. It makes sure that in the modern case that its corporations have access to resources and markets. And if any countries or people's movements get in the way, we bring in the Marines. And that's what Smedley Butler did. And it's the exact same thing that we continue doing. And and it keeps happening because the people who are profiting are the ones who are making the policy, because we have allowed a situation to happen where corporations get protected by First Amendment and money equals speech, and they buy Congress and they put their people in there to write the legislation that's going to make sure that the weapons makers and the oil companies and so forth are the ones who benefit regardless of who pays.
Is this why MSNBC, their headline, Trump's partisan generals would end American military might? Is that what they're afraid that he might do again? Everybody, please. I've had some people, Mike Ferner, Special Projects from Veterans for Peace, attorney Mark Fancher, brilliant lawyer, civil libertarian, and author. And Mark, you hear almost every day. They say that I'm supporting Trump. I'm like, I'm trying to get the story right. Oh, well, you keep saying that he's a man of peace. I never said that. But I did say the only way you can end a war is by talking to the other side. They suspend the shooting so people can go talk to each other. That's what you do.
Yeah.
And going to see Kim Jong-un, that was not a bad thing. We're still at war with them. Okay, we don't have a peace treaty. We have an armistice with them, cessation of hostilities. Not really. So I'm wondering, with the when the what was going on with these generals? Do you suspect, who were so alarmed? Because every time, I mean, whenever I hear talk about the generals, they're always alarmed by something Trump did. I mean, and this a bizarre world where we're discussing him in this context. But
Yeah.
it is because Kamala Harris, bless her heart, I supported her. She said, "Well, no, we're going to keep this up." I'm like, "What?" I wasn't surprised, but I was like, "Oh, come on, that is not what I want. I don't want these wars to go on forever. We can't afford them." And when you list out the atrocities in Afghanistan alone, Mike Turner, we can't imagine someone taking out our power grid. But we have no electricity. That's what we've done to people. Mike Ferner, Attorney Fancher, we've done that. I mean, we put people, what did you say, in containers? And they smothered to death. I mean, what if that was your loved one? I mean, Americans, I'm not ambitious for anyone to feel this pain, but we're untouched by so much of this. Untouched. And I think insensitive. I'm not going to say all of us, because many of us, well, I think we're uncomfortable because we don't, they're telling us we can't, we can't fight the wars. I mean, we can't, we've got to fight the wars, therefore we don't have enough money for you. I think Americans are sick of that, increasingly. So tell me, I mean, what happened with these generals? Why didn't they want to? You're saying they didn't want a rapid withdrawal because military contracts would not get fulfilled and people wouldn't have it. Is that it?
Well, I think that ultimately that might have been part of it. The generals themselves, if you just want to talk about them, and I've not been personally involved in military or Pentagon or anything. I'm just going on what I've been told, and that is that within the Pentagon and within that world, they have a very orthodox way of looking at world events, world developments, and how the military should be used. And they make very cold, calculated decisions about how to deploy the military, how to use it, how to deal with things strategically based on that orthodoxy. And very often it doesn't take into account the human element. Lives are expendable. And so, but there is a conventional and standard way of doing things. So that when you have a Donald Trump who comes in and for whatever reason, again, I'm not a Trump apologist either, but if what he's telling them is we've got this tension with North Korea, seems to me I should go over and have a chat with that guy and see if we can work things out. That doesn't fit within the orthodox way of dealing with an adversary. You don't do that. You don't engage with them in that way. And so I think that on some level that disturbed and alarmed them. And again, not a Trump apologist, but there's so much about the tensions that exist between the U.S. and other countries that are best resolved not by military means or even by strategic considerations that have military as a component. And to give you a concrete example, the biggest concern and fear that I think that most people in this country have with respect to military-related matters is what has been branded as terrorism.
Mhm.
And they're concerned that, especially after 9/11, that somehow the U.S. is going to be a victim of terrorism or a target of it. And so we need a strong military in order to deal with that. Terrorists are recruited usually in regions of the world where people are dealing with extreme hardship, in terms of their material conditions and their life circumstances. They're having very difficult times, and so those who recruit terrorists will go into these regions, and they will tell them they'll scapegoat certain targets. They'll say, well, you're suffering because of U.S. imperialism. You're suffering because of anti-Muslim, anti-Islam sentiments of the U.S. And it's in our interest, it's in the interest of our faith to go and strike out against them. And while we're training you, we're going to provide for your family. You don't have adequate housing, we're going to provide that for you. You don't have enough food, we're going to feed you. We're going to provide your kids with education. They address the basic needs of these people. And so there's a certain loyalty or allegiance that people develop toward these groups that are engaging in terrorism. If the US was really serious about fighting terrorism, what it would do is it would try to become a good neighbor to the world, that it would go into these regions where there's extreme hardship, and it would say, here we are, we're the big bad Americans that everybody's been talking about and complaining about, and here we're going to feed you. We're going to provide you with infrastructure. We're going to talk to you and relate to you human to human. And then after we've done that, how interested are you in coming and engaging in acts of violence against us? And so I think that, they're becoming a good neighbor to the world is often a much better strategy than trying to arm yourself to the teeth and going in and invading countries and creating havoc and destruction and providing more fuel, more ammunition, more of a rationale and a justification for those who want to engage in violence against the U.S.
But you got to have a boogeyman. This country has always got to have a boogeyman. It doesn't matter if it's Russia, China, the Salvadorans, the Guatemalans, the Nicaraguans. I mean, you just fill in the blank. And as long as you got a boogeyman, you can keep people afraid of some kind of boogeyman threat. At one point, Ronald Reagan was trying to tell people the Nicaraguans were going to march up through Central America and take over McAllen, Texas. So, I was in Guatemala in 1987 on a delegation with Veterans for Peace. And back to what you were saying, Mark, about if we were serious about dealing with what we call terrorism, if we were serious about that. When I was in Guatemala, it was in 87. We went to Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. That's when the Contra War was going crazy, and the Contras were coming out of Honduras that we were funding, going into Nicaragua and killing people and burning coffee co-ops and everything you can think of. But on our way through Guatemala on that trip, we went through all these little tiny villages, and you could see how poor people were and what the conditions were right outside the window of the van as we were driving these little 2-lane roads. And it just occurred to me, if the United States took the amount of money wouldn't be worth arguing over. If the United States took that amount of money and said, look, to the people of Guatemala, we're going to make sure you have clean water. We're going to put this system in. You're going to have clean water. Your kids aren't going to die of diarrhea and dysentery, on and on and on, all the benefits of something as simple as clean water. And then what would that mean? Well, it might mean that they would think twice before listening to people who were saying, as Mark was talking about, why do people join guerrilla movements? Because they, whether guerrilla movements or terrorist movements or whatever you want to call them, it's because they're oppressed. Nobody's going to risk their life or their family's lives because they have anything else to do. They've got reasons. And then we go in there and it's either the people that we pay, like the death squads in El Salvador, or the CIA and, name the country, or our troops. We go in there, and how many enemies do you think we make every time we kick somebody's door in Iraq at 2:00 in the morning and scare the living hell out of their kids so they pee their pants, and not even talking about bombing. So,
but do you think we know this? I mean,
sure we do.
I mean, as Americans,
Well,
the 20 years since the U.S.-led coalition invaded Iraq, impunity reigns. And this hidden history, this Times investigation, which uncovered the brutal campaign. And then there's another book that says that America is responsible for more than 300 million deaths.
Santita, I dug that stuff up that I put in the chat in about 20 minutes, getting ready for your show. And And
Do
I'm no
people
reason.
want to know?
Who knows?
And where is President-elect Trump in this? I mean, do you think, because he explained, for example, what he had to explain what he said about Liz Cheney. The corporate media said he was calling for her to be executed. I said, no, that is not what he called for. He said she's a chicken hawk. And I'm tired of these people calling for war from the luxury of DC or their luxurious homes. Why don't we put her out there on the front lines and have guns trained on her and see how she feels about it? Then let's ask her about war.
And
That's what he said.
that came from General Bone Spur Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, these guys talk out
I mean,
of both sides of their mouth.
I'm not making him a hero, but
No.
it seems to me that whenever we start calling for an end to war, I mean, because most of these people, they are not serious about peace.
No.
They're not. But when the media jumped all over him about that, I said, whenever someone wants to end a conflict, we look at them with suspicion. But if someone really wants to push for peace, that's a problem. But if we want to start a war, we cheer them on.
Oh yeah.
Well, the level of consciousness on a mass level about U.S. military abuses has risen substantially.
Okay.
Certainly from the Vietnam era. The U.S. has been able to watch. People have been able to watch these military interventions. They've seen the consequences of them. They've seen the body bags come back, and a line was drawn after the Vietnam War, when on a mass level people understood that this was an imperialist war that was just uselessly, needlessly killing lots and lots of young people from this country. And basically, the people told the government, you will not use the military for this purpose anymore. We won't support it. And since that time, the U.S. government, whenever it has wanted to deploy the military or invade or intervene or do whatever it wants to militarily, it has to create a pretext for it.
Mm-hmm.
It has to create an excuse that they believe that the people will buy, and they also have to provide some assurance to the people that this engagement is not going to be a protracted one, that they're going to get in, they're going to get out. And if it's going to be a protracted one, then they have to use proxies to do it. So in Nicaragua, Ronald Reagan desperately wanted to send the U.S. troops in to take Nicaragua back from the Sandinistas, but he knew that the public would not stand for it. I mean, there were lots of people who were going down to Nicaragua basically to put their bodies between the people of Nicaragua and the U.S. military. I was one of them. And one of the things that I saw in 1984 was in the port of Corinto in Nicaragua, whereas under Anastasio Somoza, the former dictator there, he had driven the country into such levels of poverty that large numbers of women had to sell their bodies in order to sustain themselves and their families. And at the port of Corinto, the sailors that would come in, that was their market. When the Sandinistas took power, one of the first things they did was to establish a facility at the port of Corinto for the training and the education of these women and their families. So they were training them in trades, they were training them in a number of different disciplines. And then just across the way from this facility were the burnt out ruins of oil tanks that had been bombed by the CIA. So you had these people who were getting their lives together in the shadows of these burnt out huge oil tanks that the CIA had bombed in order to destabilize the country's infrastructure. And so Grenada was a one-day war. They could get away with that one. In so many other parts of the world, they've had to use proxy forces in order to somehow keep the US public from rebelling. So it's not that the public doesn't know or doesn't care, but the information is very often cleverly kept away from them. And if they knew, I think that many of them would object very vigorously. And I think that in part, that may account for why Trump has assumed the posture that he has, because he knows that war is not popular, that people don't really like the basic idea that the country's money, is going to fund wars in these far off places when their basic needs here at home are not being met. And that probably resonates with people.
But do you think, can you imagine, or do you believe, it's possible, but is it probable that these courts martial will take place, Mike Ferner?
Let me get my crystal ball out here, Santita.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? I think it's.
Do you think it's a good thing that the specter of it has been raised?
I think, yeah, we should be looking at what happened in Afghanistan, and maybe, just maybe, if we start where Trump is talking about, will open the door to looking at beyond that. They're going to try to control it politically to be just whatever Trump wants looked at with the withdrawal, and not get into anything that happened before that. So who knows? I mean, it's. I'd be the last person to try to guess what's inside of that guy's mind. Put it that way.
We're talking with Mike Ferner, Veterans for Peace, head of their special projects. He was their executive director, attorney Mark Fancher, civil libertarian, author, brilliant lawyer, about the proposed courts martials. I mean, it just seems that Donald Trump has gone in there disrupting. I'm just wondering, to what end? How would that work out with the military, Mike Ferner?
Well, Santita, that's in today's news, and you're obviously, that's one of the things that we talk about when it gets broadcast all over NBC and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But Donald Trump, better than most politicians, is able to just keep the news cycle spinning at top speed. So come up, George Bush did this during the Iraq invasion. I mean, they came up with so many outrageous things day after day after day. It just made your head spin. And you start thinking, well, which one of these things should we try focusing on and deconstructing, so we can try to figure out what's going on? And that's part of what they do. I mean, tomorrow it'll be something else. So yeah, I mean, it's worth talking about what we think might happen. But I think the conversation that Mark and I are that you're letting us have here is a heck of a lot more valuable, and rarely gets an opportunity for people to think about beyond whatever today's crazy headline is. That people in DC, particularly the president-elect, can generate headlines at the snap of a finger. It doesn't mean it's worth spending a whole lot of time going down that rabbit hole.
Well, I think this is important because we've got bases all over the world. And we've got soldiers all over the world. They have entered the Mideast conflict. They've been there already, but now there they are. Long-range missiles are being fired by Ukraine into Russia. Boots on the ground. To me, they're right. It's already happening, and I'm wondering if our soldiers are aware of the misdeeds that we commit, because it seems to me there's a change of mission when they get over there. I was talking to some people who had served in Iraq, and they said, what angered them to a person. We got over there, we're making barely enough money to cover rent at home, and I'm protecting a private contractor who's making $100,000-$200,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's what Pat Tillman was talking about, not to mention the atrocities that are committed. Is that something we're thinking about? I mean, and that, to me, that makes our troops less safe. If they're feared, if they're not seen as freedom fighters, if they're seen as oppressors. Do you think is that something that Trump, or Mark, you jump into it? Do you think that's something that he's thinking about?
I don't know if he's thinking about it, but I think that's a real point. I think that on the one hand, the soldiers themselves, once they have those experiences, their consciousness rises, and they become Mike Ferner. And then you also have situations where they really are at risk. For example, in Niger, just a few years ago, the French have maintained a military occupation of Niger for years, or they had up until recently, because they have uranium mines, extensive uranium mines there, and they use their military troops to protect them. The U.S. was providing backup and support for that. And because the people of Niger saw the French as an unwelcome occupying force, there was a grassroots resistance to those who would come in and to help them. So there were 3 U.S. soldiers who were shot and killed, by unidentified people, but probably those who were opposed to the French military presence in their country. And when they were killed, everybody was outraged. Certainly people, the broad mass of people were outraged, but there were even people in Congress who were quoted as saying, "I didn't even know we were in Niger." And so there's an awareness by people who are actually on the ground and who are playing the role of soldier. They know it, but then I think the broad masses of people don't always know it until there is a tragedy. And I think if they knew before the fact that people were in harm's way, that they would be opposed to it, which is, it underscores the importance of propaganda by the Pentagon and the U.S., the military industrial complex generally, about what we're doing around the world and why we're doing it.
Mike Ferner, Veterans for Peace, Attorney Mark Fancher. I want to get we have about 5 minutes left here, and I want you all to help us to understand what we're looking at here. Because, it seems that, this is countering the narrative, if you will, Mike Ferner. I'm wondering if we're going to go into this new administration with World War III on our hands or something close to it. Shooting long-range missiles into Ukraine. And President Putin has said, I will consider this to be an act of aggression from NATO and specifically the United States.
Yeah.
And the people of the government of Iraq said, you mess with us, you're going to feel it on your shores. I mean, these are the things that are out here. And these are people, we don't know Iraq's military abilities. But we do. I think they're capable.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Iran.
Excuse me, Iran. Yeah, I mean, they are capable.
Yeah, they sure are.
And I think underestimating people, because I saw this educator from Oklahoma saying, we want to teach about American, exceptionalism and things like that. I'm like, that is crazy. The world has changed. This is not 1942. This is we're moving into 2040. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're closer to that than we are to 2000 even. And so I'm trying to figure out what is going on here. Because if you have the president-elect saying, I'm looking at court-martialing some of these people in the military, the generals, first of all, he's going to anger them. And it's sounding it sounds like it's high risk, if not dangerous. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be court-martialed. I'm not saying that at all. I mean, and Mark, you make the point, wait a minute, the people who stopped the rapid withdrawal, put them in it too. I'm with you. I'm just trying to figure out where this is, what's it all about, Alfie? Let me insert here, Mike. What are we looking at?
There's one word that pretty succinctly describes it, and it's empire. This is, when you start to look at this country as an empire, which it has been for quite some time, ever since the Spanish-American War, and we took over Cuba and the Philippines and a couple other places and greatly expanded on that empire after the Second World War. And now, as you mentioned, have hundreds and hundreds of bases all over the world. And our big boogeyman enemies like Russia and China have maybe 20 or 30 tops, and we've got 700 or 800. Anyway, we are an empire, and empires. This one does what every empire does, and so when you start to look at what our foreign policy is and what our domestic policy is in the context of this being an empire, things start to make sense. Our money is going to enforce our control of the world's resources for our corporations, and that means there is a lot less money for the things that we need desperately here at home. And that's the way empires work. And the thing is, the other way they work is they always, at some point, fall flat on their faces. And this one's no different than the rest of them. The problem is there's going to be a lot of suffering in many ways when that happens. So, I just hope, and I guess, not speaking for Mark, but from what he's saying, I would think, both of us would hope that more of our fellow citizens would take the time to look at these things. The system is structured in such a way to keep you busy and distracted and working too many jobs. And,
Oh,
Hmm.
well, but he does make the point. The system is structured to keep us distracted, and that's why I keep bringing this up. Um, but in the last couple of minutes, your thoughts. Well, Mike is back, so let me let him finish.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, that's pretty much it. I mean, this system. Read what Chomsky talks about with manufacturing consent, and you can see how the system is put together to keep people busy and distracted and working to the bone and not able to participate in civic life. Sometimes that's from oppressive things like having to have several jobs, and sometimes it's just spreading circuses. All of the distractions and stuff that are so easy, whether it's shopping or fill in the blank. So
Well, I'm wondering if it's still working. I mean, CNN, we just did in the previous hour, the plummeting ratings of CNN and MSNBC and corporate media in general. 4 years ago, on election night, CNN had 13.3 million viewers. This past election night, Tuesday, November 5th, they had a little north of 800,000. I'm saying there has been a shift, a profound shift.
Well, if that part of that shift is that people are finding independent sources to understand what's really going on, as opposed to the latest and craziest QAnon conspiracy, that's great, because they're not going to get it from CNN, but they're not going to get it from a lot of the goofy places they can go to and circulating the same conspiracy theories about whatever today's is. There are places in independent media that you can find out pretty easily, actually, like the stuff that I put in the chat. You can find out fairly easily if you follow that stuff. But you've got to make an effort to get beyond what the standard narrative is, which is everything's fine, just keep going to work, pay off as much of your credit cards as you can this month, and let us take care of things.
Well, Mark, what are your thoughts? I mean, because I just, bless your heart, Tracy. You said I go out of my way to give Trump. You said an adjudicated rape is so much leeway, and no, I don't. What I want to do, Mike Ferner, excuse me, and Mark Fancher, attorney Mark Fancher, is I want to get the story right. I feel like we're being misled, and in many instances, we're not being told the truth. And Tracy, I travel out of the country a lot, and I have a lot of friends who are not from the United States. So I don't just hear our narrative, Mike Ferner and Mark Fancher. I hear what we look like through other people's eyes. And I want you to know I'm also someone I'm deeply religious, and I have not hidden that from you. And if you're a secularist, if you are an atheist, that does not bother me, because we're all pilgrims on this journey, and I want you to get to where you really feel you need to go. I get that. But I'm just telling you, for me, I don't like to jump to conclusions. I like to arrive at them. And I know enough about politics because I've been in the room, but a lot of decisions have been made. And I can tell you and Mike Ferner, you understand it, and so do you, Attorney Mark Fancher, things are never what they seem. They're just not. And a lot of the things that we find out when they release the documents 20, 30, 50, 100 years later, when we've trotted off this mortal coil. And I'm just trying, I don't want anyone else to get killed in war. I don't want anyone coming to our shores and visiting upon us what we have visited upon others. I want to stop doing to others what I don't want done unto me. So I don't care what someone's motivations are because I don't want to fall in love with politicians. Well, I just need them to fall in line with the right principles and then I can keep it moving. So whether I like said elected official or not, it has nothing to do with anything. Some of the people I like are my political opponents. And some people who are personally distasteful to me are my political allies who will stab me in the chest if they can. I mean, because it's just the way it works. I'm just trying to get the story right, everybody. And I have lived long enough and I've seen enough to know that I don't just necessarily trust the official narrative, Mark Fancher and Mike Ferner. I don't. I've seen too much. I want to know if he deals with these people who extended Afghanistan, as you pointed out, Mark Fancher. Will he end some other conflict? What else are you going to do? But let's start with this one.
Yeah. So I really suspect that what Trump really is about to do is to try and clear the way for him to use the military in the way that he's talked about using it against the
American people.
Domestic enemy or whatever it may be. So this just may be a way for him to do that. But as to that or anything else that he might want to do, which is harmful, we possess the power to stop it. And the best example I can give of that is, I give the Black community credit for stopping the Iraq War.
Yes.
And the reason that I do is the Army itself conducted a survey and a study to determine why the number of recruits from the Black community plunged during the Iraq War. And they found that it was because people who were influential in the Black community, teachers, pastors, community leaders, were telling young people, do not enlist. And this was so prevalent. There were so many kids who were being told not to enlist that the U.S. was not able to maintain enough troops to continue the war. And so we can certainly do that through continuing non-cooperation, but it requires a level of consciousness such as what existed in the Black community during that time, among the broader masses of people. But at the same time that we stop ourselves from physically entering into the military, we also need to be strategic and thinking about their contingency plans, which is to continue to prosecute wars without US soldiers. They do it with proxy troops, and they're doing it with drones and with technology. And that's the future danger that I think we need to be concerned about.
And keep your eyes open. And I'm not going to address this trolling that you're doing, Tracy, because you want to provoke a problem, you don't want to solve them. And what we want to do here is end wars for all time. That's where I come from. And when it comes to politics, I've told you, keep all your eyes open, keep both eyes open. But don't fall in love, have people fall in line with the right principles. That's all you need to do. This is not about liking someone to me. This is about loving the highest principles and really having a peaceful society, creating a beloved community. That's the tradition from which I come. That was the goal, Dr. King's goal. They said Dr. King was the architect and Reverend Jackson has been the builder. And they were not alone. They've not been alone. But that's what I'm looking to. I'm looking for a peaceful society and a just world. That's what I want. That's what I want. And I'm going to continue to push for it. And you know what? I'm going to work with people to make that happen. And I can't examine everybody's motivations. But what I want to know is, if a president can't trust the people who's working around him, that's a problem. Kennedy had that problem. Now, and as I read more about him, he's someone who I support. See, my politics are based on principle. They're not personal. See, I called him President Trump when he was no longer president because I was offended when people called Barack Obama Barack. President Obama. I said, wait a minute, he's got a title. He's got a handle. Don't do that. I would see people be offended when folks would call my father Jesse. He's a grown man. Now he's 83. He's Reverend. So let's stop it. Now, either you want to resolve some issues, and you said you stopped looking at the show for months. I hear you. If this show is something that's distasteful for you, I want you to find some place where you can be comforted or where you can get the information you need. Really, you have the right to do that. But don't be disruptive in this chat. You don't have the right to do that. If you want to increase some understanding or if you want to find something, great. But I will not allow you to tell untruths on me. I've never been a Trump defender, and I don't need to say that to you. I'm not going to say it anymore. I'm an adult. And I'm an independent one politically. What I want is peace. I want us to begin to find a profit and a motive for peace. Period. And I want to know more than that. Attorney Mark Fancher and Mike Ferner are Veterans for Peace. I want to know what's going on. Because every day it's something new. So everybody, bless your heart, Tracy. Just, honey, just go on and do what you're going to do. Okay? I hear you. Just enough. Because I'm done with that. We're adults here. And we're just going to continue to move forward. But Mike Ferner, thank you so much for being here. I was struck by that, and I saw the discussion in social media. I said this will be something interesting to talk about today, because because the military does take up half of our budget. I think
Yep.
we need to find out what's going on. Attorney Mark Fancher, sending you much love, and thank you all for looking and listening today. And keep your ears open, your eyes peeled, and seek some understanding and get involved. Now that the election has been held, we've got a house to recapture in 2026. But more than that, I need you to start calling these elected officials, whether you voted for them or not. Whoever was elected, now is the time for you to get involved, and you need to let them know what it is that you want them to do. Whatever their political stances are, they work for you. They work for you now. Remember that. They work for you. Make them work for you. I'm Santita Jackson. This is AM 950 Radio. God bless you, everybody.